Doing our anthropology presentation on flying cars. My name is Sam Frank.
Hi, Ngoma.
And I'm Satwick Gaddam.
So, for introduction, the concept of flying cars has been envisioned as the futuristic mode of transportation. While this idea has been a staple in science fiction, recent advancements in technology and aerospace have brought it closer to reality. Now, this is seen with the advancements of near electrical vertical takeoff technology, and which exploits the multi-directional thrust, allowing for flight to be achieved through means of vertical takeoff. Now, for the longest time, on the governmental policy side, the highest point of consideration for air traffic safety was only in the realm for helicopters and the ethical boundaries for helicopters in terms of pollution and noise emission. This obviously leaves a gap in the market for flying cars, for the progression of flying cars. For this presentation, we will go over inclusivities on a specific point on how our redesign can help aid in the revamping of governmental policy in specific to regard with people with disabilities.
So yeah, as mentioned before, current flying car designs don't really account for people with disabilities, and we can kind of see that in this picture here, from this flying car design from Aeromobile. A person in a wheelchair, for example, wouldn't necessarily be able to properly access his vehicle and use it. And that's kind of what we put our focus into today. We wanted to focus on people with limited motor function abilities and how we can create a redesign process for the current designs of flying cars to be more inclusive for these people with disabilities. So the redesign itself. So as mentioned before, we're trying to make flying cars more accessible to people with disabilities. And in order to do that, what we did was we essentially went and we looked for what current technology and features are being used in current road cars to make them more accessible for people in wheelchairs, right? And we noticed equipment such as seatbelt adjustments, safety bar and straps, ramps, swivel chairs, and hand controls would be added to these road cars, and they would be altered in these ways to make them more accessible to people with disabilities. And that's essentially what we thought would be needed to be done for these flying car designs. So a combination of this listed equipment being incorporated by companies such as Joby Aviation and Aeromobile in their current flying car designs would make them more inclusive for people in wheelchairs. And also, we need new road features that aid people with disabilities during their travels. So, for example, with current day road cars, we have features such as handicap parking spots and parking lots at stores, for example, that make the ease of traveling from their car to the store easier for people with disabilities, right? And when you introduce flying cars, yes, they can use these handicap parking spots as well, but the factor of how about kind of these parking areas in the sky, for example, when they're flying, or designated landing areas at airports, designated parking areas at airports, when these flying cars were to land in these designated areas, kind of having a separate area for disabled people with disabilities would be highly beneficial. And so what redesign steps would be needed to kind of incorporate this new equipment? Well, obviously, as mentioned before, companies such as Joby Aviation and Aeromobile would need to alter their current designs to be more inclusive and have the equipment listed in the prior slide and adjust their patents accordingly. And then after they do so, the design needs to be approved by certain organizations, specifically the FAA, which is Federal Aviation Administration, and also the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, the NHTSA. And the reason we need approval from both organizations, obviously, is because flying cars ride the line of, are they airplanes or are they road vehicles, right? So approval from both administrations would be necessary once the design is complete by the companies.
All right. So I will be talking a little bit about the inclusion and accessibility. So, a few things that we want to focus in on when we're talking about the inclusion and accessibility of flying cars is the seamless travel experience. So, design enhancements should aim to improve a seamless travel experience for people with disabilities, ensuring that flying cars are user friendly and considerate of all diverse needs. Another crucial point is thoughtful infrastructure. Beyond the vehicles themselves, the surrounding infrastructure includes roads and parking areas. They should be thoughtfully designed to support individuals with disabilities during their journeys, such as, close parking for those in wheelchairs. Stuff already exists, like parking lots like that. Uh, user fr- User-friendly access. The development of flying cars should incorporate features and mechanisms that allow for easy, user-friendly access for individuals with disabilities, removing potential barriers to entry. For example, as Teslas are very non-user friendly for people with disabilities. You can go to the next slide. Okay, so the another important point to bring up is the ADA, the American Disabilities Act, passed into law in 1990. Um, Mandated that public transportation needs to be accessible to those with disabilities, in ensuring that reasonable accommodations, making flying cars and other modes of public transportation accessible to individuals with disabilities is crucial.
So now kind of going over the ethical concerns that come with flying cars, right? So kind of broken into three categories here. One of them being environment concerns, so specifically emissions testing and regulation. So with current road cars, we certain government organizations in different areas of the world have different emissions testing and regulations um to make sure that a car is not producing too many harmful greenhouse gases for the environment, right? And if a new production car is unable to meet these benchmarks for emissions, it's not able to be released for the general public to use. So this kind of raises a concern for flying cars because the fact that they fly means that, in order to propel something in the sky, you need a lot more fuel and a lot more and power to do so. And that obviously automatically equates to more emissions being produced. So the concern of, okay, so do these flying cars fall under the emissions testing and regulations for airplanes, or do they fall under emissions testing and regulations for cars is the question here, right? Obviously, for airplanes, they're allowed to produce more emissions simply because of the amount of fuel and the size that they are, and the amount of fuel that they use as opposed to cars. So essentially, we believe that a new kind of emissions testing protocol would have to be created to fit for flying cars because they would produce emissions in between airplanes and in between regular road cars. And next concern is traffic concerns, right? And related to ethics. So obviously we have, roadways and highways laid out for cars to travel on that have speed limits to regulate speed, and as well as equipment such as stoplights to regulate the flow of traffic. Now, once you start flying and you're in the sky, the concept of roadways and traffic signals kind of go away as of right now, at least. So in order to and this could, once the technology gets advanced enough where there's so many people flying cars, it could lead to hazards because if you have no designated flying areas or flying pathways per se, people can fly anywhere that could cause accidents, right? So in order to, again, combat this, an equivalent technology to traffic signals can be introduced in the sky to regulate traffic, as well as kind of designated, again, as I said before, pathways or flight paths that flying cars are able to take in order to, again, avoid any accidents that could occur when there's multiple flying cars flying around the sky. And additionally, there are safety concerns related to ethics. So, and a big concern is crash protection. So currently, again, with road cars, getting to a crash itself is very dangerous for you, right? But you're already on the ground, So but when with flying cars, there's obviously the risk of crashing into another flying car still exists. But now you have to worry about the factor of, okay, once you do crash, now you're up in the sky, right? What's going to happen when you start falling from the sky after a crash, for example? And so that's a very big safety concern that current flying car companies have to take account for. And again, as mentioned before, companies such as Joby Aviation and Aeromobile have taken into account, right? They essentially have to create a pod system where if there's a crash detected in the sky, the pod would detach from the vehicle itself with the occupants in it, and would essentially kind of use a combination of parachute technology to guide them safely to the ground. However, once a person were to reach the ground after they get in a crash in the sky, the concept of, okay, so what do they do after they land in this, for example, if they were to land in a remote area, how would they get in contact with safety officers to get them to safety, right? So those concerns do exist, and companies and also government organizations would have to work to create a proper crash protection protocol for these cars. And as well as phone use, the usage for phones varies across from regular road cars and airplanes, for example. When you're driving a moving vehicle, you're not allowed to call or text anyone or use your phone. However, again, depending on what kind of aircraft you're flying and whether you're flying for a commercial company or on your own, etc., a lot of factors that go into it. But phone use varies once you reach the cruising altitude and when you're flying an airplane. And depending on your circumstances, pilots can use phones for their own discretion or for flying purposes, right? So again, where do flying cars fall into this category of phone use? It comes into play here because they're a hybrid of road cars and airplanes, right? So again, a new safety protocol and new set of rules regarding, for example, phone use would have to be made by government organizations in order to combat the safety and ethical concerns of that topic.
So to summarize, we discussed the proximity of current technology to actual reality. However, current models of vertical takeoff and landing have yet to be suited for people with disabilities. Another factor that we considered was the government regulation and that it needs to be revamped, and that our redesign proposal, will aid in such endeavor. Another thing we discussed was inclusion issue in terms of how Joby aircraft are the leading model for flying cars or vertical takeoff technology is in need of more inclusive features. And the last thing we discussed was the ethical issues that could potentially come up in the future in terms of safety concerns and environmental impacts that might be later disclosed.